The clinic and the advanced clinic undertake a whole bunch of different projects across roughly 4 thematic areas. The first of which is bringing human rights home, through which we re-examine issues that are domestic through the lens of human rights law to figure out how to diagnose a problem differently, but also how to think more creatively about a human rights compliant solution. The second area of work that we do in the clinic and the advanced clinic is focusing on human rights in US foreign policy. And here what we're really trying to do is translate the experience and the impact of US human rights and foreign policy abroad into impacting the ways in which the government can change those policies and hopefully have more compliant human rights outcomes. The third area of work that we do in our clinic focuses on an area of international law called standard setting, where really we work with a whole bunch of different actors to think through ways in which we can improve our understanding of human rights norms. So identifying where there are pockets and gaps in international human rights law and seeking to work toward a more coherent normative understanding of what human rights law should be saying on a certain topic. And the final fourth area of work on which we focus is what we roughly call human rights in situations where there is a nascent protection. And that can mean, for example, most recently, we've been focusing on how to move the human rights community or communities away from a purely critique-based model to human rights to thinking much more about what positive practices might look like in the human rights space. So again, areas where there's nascent work, geographically or thematically, that we feel the clinic can really move the needle on.
And on the last area of work, I wanted to elaborate on a project that the clinic has undertaken since the spring of 2020 with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we've been identifying and collecting positive things that governments globally have done during the pandemic from a human rights perspective. And this is really looking at human rights advocacy in a new and different way. And so starting from the point of what human rights advances are being made by governments in a good way and encouraging governments to do more of this. And this is an alternative to or supplement to more of the critique model that human rights organizations and advocates have traditionally used. So the name of this new project is Catalyzing Rights, and it's a literal catalog and tracker of human rights advances made by governments during the COVID-19 pandemic.
And with the clinic, we undertake a number of different things. We co-teach the seminar, which is the weekly seminar, and we also supervise students quite intensively in the field work that is part of the clinical requirement.
And in doing this, we work with a number of different partner organizations, ranging from large non-governmental organizations, both based in the US and globally. And we also partner with different UN institutions, entities, and experts in doing our field work.
The students are eligible for the core clinic from their fall of 2L. There is no ethics prereq for our clinic. There is, however, a co-req or prereq of doing human rights advocacy, which is available to students in the fall. We really tend to encourage students to try and enroll in the clinic as soon as they can during their law school experience, because then we can think a lot about the ways in which that clinic then relates to an advanced clinic opportunity or potentially an externship opportunity as well. For students that don't get into the clinic in the fall of their 2L, there are a whole other range of experiential education opportunities that we offer at Duke for their human rights education, and maybe you'd like to talk us through some of those a bit.
So one new opportunity is the Human Rights Pro Bono program, and this really was triggered by increasing student interest, including from 1Ls who are not yet eligible to take a clinic, and from LLMs who might not have the chance during their 1 year here to take the clinic. So this is a chance for students who are interested in human rights to work with different partner organizations on discrete human rights projects for either a semester or a year or longer, and develop some of the human rights advocacy skills that will be useful to them if they decide to pursue a career in human rights, or even if it's something that they want to dip into and learn more about. And also, as part of our broader human rights program, we run a Human Rights in Practice event series where we organize 4 to 5 events per semester, where we invite in practitioners and experts in the human rights field to talk about a range of different emerging and really thought-provoking human rights issues. And these events are open to all students who might be interested in human rights.
The work really involves a whole bunch of human rights competencies. So every project is a little bit different depending upon the goals for the semester and the particular partner that's involved. But overall, we tend to focus on fact-finding, so interviewing and other forms of evidence collection, authentication, and use. We also focus on documentation and reporting, and again, that documentation and reporting can take many different forms. It can be a very classic human rights report. It can be more of the cataloguing via a website or other online tool. So fact-finding, documentation and reporting, advocacy, right? And that has a whole different bunch of components to it. That can include policy work. It can include thinking through how to change the policy of a domestic government or an intergovernmental agency, potentially as well. And the final area of work that students tend to explore across all projects is some type, as I mentioned earlier, of norm development. How can we really understand what human rights law does say on a particular issue, what it should say on a particular issue, and how can we contribute to improving the normative protections in the particular space in which we're working.
So really a whole range of different legal skills. So starting with, for example, legal research skills. And for this, students are already often in law school exposed to legal research looking at U.S. domestic sources. And in our clinic, they have the chance to do research looking at different international human rights treaties, becoming familiar with different international human rights mechanisms. And so research really founded with a foundation in the international human rights space. There's also a lot of legal writing that we work on. We also work on different oral advocacy and broader communication skills. So both in the advocacy space and also thinking about how do we talk about human rights to different types of audiences. We also look at issues around how to confront ethical issues that arise in human rights work, how to do negotiations in the human rights space, different interviewing skills. And so what is it like to interview a survivor of human rights violation, a perpetrator, a government official? And what are the different interview skills that are needed for different types of stakeholders and recipients?
We really struggled to think about one anecdote that would sum up the clinical experience and what it can offer to our students, but also what our students can offer to the space of human rights. But one that really stood out for me was earlier this semester, the clinic and the advanced clinic travelled to The Hague to co-host an expert group meeting of over 100 persons talking about the topic of how to ensure accountability for conflict-related trafficking in persons. So taking a bit of a step back, this is an issue. We know trafficking in conflict and post-conflict is a huge human rights concern, but there's very little that's done in practice to ensure accountability for those who traffic persons during conflict and after conflict settings. And so the goal of this convening was to bring together people working in different country contexts, people working in domestic and international organizations, people working from the international criminal law, the human rights law, the humanitarian law, the refugee law perspective, to try and come up with an understanding of what are the actual gaps that are preventing accountability for trafficking in persons during these particular settings. So students were absolutely critical in all phases of that work, in terms of planning, in terms of structuring the agenda, in terms of engaging with the experts and doing follow-up, and in drafting some of the really key provisions that will inform the report's analysis. There are lots of ways in which students can continue to be engaged in human rights practice after graduation. The first of which is by engaging directly in human rights work, whether that be in a domestic government setting or a non-governmental setting or international institution. That's one pathway our students take. Another is if students are pursuing private practice, to think through the ways in which they can incorporate pro bono work into that practice. And we often spend a lot of time talking to students about how they can do that and how they can meaningfully build upon their clinical experience to ensure that corporate careers also have attention to the issues they really care about. And as part of that, we really are engaged in a constant mentoring with our students beyond law school to make sure that that is a core part of their professional work. A third area and way in which students can continue to do this type of work is through, we have a really amazing postgraduate fellowship in international law and human rights, which enables a student to spend 1 year after graduation working in the human rights field, whether that be in an international organization or an international NGO or domestic NGO, with the view to enabling them to have a long-term career in human rights.